Hi, hello. Welcome to my living room. You know why you're here. The first data slate for 11th edition has finally hit the game, so we're going to go over it quickly. This slate was pretty surgical, it was quite precise. There's a lot of little needed changes here and there, but they haven't straight up taken a sledgehammer to any of the factions. I think overall that's a pretty good thing. I think there was a lot of worry when they announced they would be updating the game quite frequently after it had launched 11th edition, that they'd be kind of exploding any faction that creeped over a 50% win rate. So the fact they've gone in with a bit of a lighter touch is, I think, a step in the right direction. Obviously, I am mostly focused about the Chaos Knight stuff. I'm going to go over that at the end. There's a lot to talk about, there's a lot I'm very excited about, but hang around for that. And we'll quickly go over some of the kind of winners and losers generally. I think that, in my opinion, there was mainly three big losers in this data slate, that being Space Marines, Thousand Suns, and Imperial Knights. I haven't taken a super fine-tooth comb to every single faction pack and every single Munitorum field manual for all the factions, so I apologize if you feel like your faction in particular was completely decimated by this one. However, on first glance, this is simply what I have found. Starting with Imperial Knights, the main thing that got changed around this one was the Gatewarden Lance detachment. Obviously, you might have played against this attachment. It was completely nuts. It was so absurd, having a line so big that gave so many buffs. With like 6 bigs in the list, it was just crushing. It was super, super difficult to play against. The main thing that changed here was an actual rewrite to the Gatewarden Lance detachment rule. You no longer can draw this big, massive, huge, thick line between two objectives. You now choose this kind of super thin, precise line across two of the objectives, and you have to stand on that to get all of your buffs, rather than this fucking huge subway sub that you lay across the table and stand your knights on top of. The other part of this combination with Gatewarden Lance was Dominus Foebreakers, one of their new 1DPs, and it was also causing quite a lot of problems, specifically within this combo. It was giving this army access to Purge the Foe, which is incredibly strong. Obviously, this was 6 big knights. It wanted to kill you hard and shoot you off the objective, and that was pretty much it. Whilst also buffing the Castellan chassis to the 9s, being able to shoot things better that are just standing within a terrain piece, now that everything matters in terrain in the game now, is just, or was, quite absurd. So it seems to have been toned down quite a bit. Obviously, with the line nerf to Gatewarden Lance, they've also changed Dominus Foebreakers away from Purge the Foe, and they have turned it into priority assets, which is still a very good primary. A lot of people consider it one of the easiest ones to score really highly with. However, it moves away from the kind of ethos that this list really wanted to do. The 6 bigs, hyper shooting, wanted to kill you hard, forcing them to do some actions, a lot of them to do with the central objectives, kind of makes them come a bit closer to you. It might be a bit easier to not just get completely shot off the board without them having to give up a single knight. Alongside this, I believe the Castellan also received a small points bump, in line with a lot of this stuff, just to really make sure the build is mostly dead. I'm sure there is something you're still able to do with Gatewarden Lance, but I think this really oppressive version is gone, which I think overall is good for the game. The rest of the army is completely untouched, which I think is good. They shouldn't be completely crushed just because they had one broken build. If that was the case, then no army in the game should ever be played ever. You know, we all occasionally commit a sin or two against the game. We all played during the night summer of 2025, so, you know, I think this should be fine from here. Next, Thousand Suns. This one is mostly to do with the points, I believe. I'm not sure if there was possibly some rules changes inside of their faction pack, but if you go over to the Munitorum Field Manual page, it is all red, baby. It is 99% red on a lot of the stuff they were running. As you might know, if you play any of the Chaos factions, all of the Defilers went up in points. I think this is a good thing. The Defilers were still very strong. A lot of people were taking a lot of them. I think a little extra points. They didn't go overboard with it, but I think it was just enough to kind of put them at a place that feels about right. The Thousand Suns one was incredibly strong, getting the Feel No Pain, its previous rule, which did actually change now that I think about it. I think, you know, it is worthwhile. The two other things that got changed were the Secatar robots and the Scarab Occult Terminators. These were often being used in a pair with one of their 1DP detachments and one of their 2DPs, just running around causing havoc, having, you know, 12 Secatar robots, infiltrating psychic weapons, you know, guns out the wazoo, and then 30 Terminators to back it up, was, I think, just a little bit too much. I have never played against it personally myself. I've watched a lot of games with it and stuff like that. I have friends who played against it. They said it's very oppressive. And I think overall, it's maybe a good thing the build is gone. There's a lot of weird point changes in this one. Things like the Zangor Shaman, Zangor Enlightened, and just Sorcerer in general, all going up somewhat in points. You know, again, I can't speak too much to the internal balance of the faction. Maybe this was needed, maybe this wasn't needed. I feel like they probably could have just touched the Defiler, the Sakatar, and the Scarab Occults. It probably would have been fine, but again, what do I know? Here we do see one of the new kind of big changes. They've put Hexwarp Thrallband, I believe a detachment that they were seeing a lot of, especially with the Defilers, has gone up to 3 detachment points, which is quite a big step up. Thousand Sons do now have 2 3DP detachments. I think this takes away a lot of the kind of creativity in the list building. I maybe would have preferred they go in and maybe alter some of the rules before bumping something up to another 3DP. You can see with armies like Tau or Sisters, too many 3DPs does kill a lot of the creativity when your detachment count is already quite low. Maybe this is fine. I think it remains to be seen, but this one I'm a little bit iffy on. Last up is Space Marines. I think most people know about this. This one, a lot of people might have considered they went a little bit overboard on. You scroll through the Munitorum Field Manual, and again, it's all red. It is a lot of changes. Things like the Repulsor Executioner taking points costs on the weapons. I believe the Combi Lieutenant went up again, things like that. A lot of things got bumped up in points. The main big change was obviously to Librarius Conclave. If any of you had the misfortune of playing against Librarius Conclave within the last month, I'm truly sorry for what you had to go through, especially as a Knights player. I played against it for the first time just at this past weekend. I played against it twice in a 5-round GT. Horrifying. Oh my god, I wish I had prepared into that unit before I went to this GT. That thing was nuts. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the specific Librarius Conclave sin that was committed was all surrounding this one enhancement called Fusillade. The tech here was that you take a Librarian in a unit of 10-man Stern Guard, and this enhancement gave them critical wounds on 5-ups against monsters and vehicles. What this comboed really well with is the Stern Guard's guns, which all have devastating wounds. Normally, if you were to have a 10-man Stern Guard brick, just shoot a knight, say it has Oath of Moment, so they're getting their rerolls on Oath, and they reroll the wound because they're Stern Guard, that's their special rule against the Oath target. They're doing a pretty decent amount of mortal wounds, but it's strength 4, they're only deving on 6s, maybe they do a handful, 10 to 12 if they're lucky. What this Fusillade enhancement has done is because they now get critical hits on 5s, they were dev wounding you on 5s and 6s, and it also had another writer in there that said if they were in the correct Librarius thing, they also got sustained hits. So, because of that, because they were rerolling the hit because of Oath, they were rerolling the wound because of Oath, they were devsing you on 5s and 6s, and then the Librarian also could just roll an absurd amount of shots and receive a lot of the similar benefits. They would just top to bottom whatever the hell they looked at that was within 24 inches and a vehicle. In my first game at this GT, I was playing against Space Wolves. It was an all Terminator list. I was mostly worried about how am I going to deal with the 4 wound guys. You know, that's pretty scary. I'd seen he'd had the Stern Guard brick. I heard people talking about it. I was like, okay, I'll just try and avoid it. So turn 2, my Lancer's in the middle of the table, you know, fucking things up as he does, as your Lancer should, and my opponent brings his Stern Guard down from a drop pod. I'm like, cool, okay, 4-up invuln, I have stratagems for melee if I need to, I'll hopefully live on something, I'll handle the melee, and then I'll heal back in my command phase. But, no, 32 dev wounds on my Knight Lancer, and he's gone. I mean, what do we do against that? So yeah, obviously, I think it was a good thing Fusillade was changed. It was clearly just busted against anything that was vehicles. I believe the enhancement has been changed to always give you lethal hits, and then you can get sustained hits if you're in the right Librarius doctrine thing, which I think is much better. You can still have a good, you know, anti-vehicle unit. You can put it on Terminators. They can still get Librarian buffs and blah, 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 blah. You know, good change overall, I think. I know there was also a few, again, detachments moved around, some moved to priority, some moved to recon. They seem to just move everything that was on Purge off of Purge, either to disruption or priority. That probably happened somewhere in there, so I'm sure it's fine. Space Marine players, I don't know, cry more, your faction is fine, you'll get a codex in like a month's time anyways, so yeah. For big winners for this data slate, again, I think a lot of factions came out pretty alright on the other end. I think they handled a lot of things with care. It was all very precise, it was very needed, not overboard. So I think most people are pretty happy with it. I think factions like World Eaters came out pretty well of it. You know, you just go to the Munitorum Field Manual page, and there is so much green, you might think it is a Green Tide Orcs list. I think Emperor's Children came out of this one pretty well. They seem to have come away with minimal changes. Obviously, their Defiler went up in points like all the other Chaos factions, but considering how well they were doing, I think they got off relatively scot-free. I think Demons got some much needed changes to specifically the Scintillating Legion build, but on the whole, I think Demons are still doing pretty alright. However, obviously, there's one big winner and I mean this genuinely, even though I am biased, that we need to talk about, and that is Chaos Knights. Genuinely, for this data slate, I was not expecting much for Knights at all. We've all seen the weekly meta updates or whatever. Chaos Knights, 33% win rate, 36% win rate. Nobody has gone 4-1 at a GT of any kind, and it's all horrible, and you shouldn't play Knights, and they're disgusting and terrible, and you should just, I don't know, throw yourself off of a bridge. And with the data slate, I was very much not expecting too much. Again, with Knights and being so early in the edition, I was worried they were either going to touch Knights too heavily and bring us way too far up, or they weren't going to touch us at all, and we were just going to stay completely the same, even though we do clearly need changes. And much like they handled the Imperial Knight changes, which I think they handled perfectly, I think they've also done a really good job with Chaos Knights. In terms of points and stuff like that, we didn't receive all too much, which I think I'm fine with. I think a lot of our issues go a little bit deeper than points. There's maybe some things that could have gotten cheaper. Not the Ruinator, please don't put the Ruinator down any more points. 340 I feel like is insane. I'm very much considering running one myself. Yeah, no more on the Ruinator. I think leave that for now. But the point changes we did see though were 5-point drops on the Huntsman and on the Stalker. The Huntsman I'm a little bit iffy on. Again, it just feels too low volume. I am all for including a Knight just on the chance that maybe it spikes and it blows something up. But the Huntsman is just, it's never worked out for me. I think its melee kind of sucks. You're really just relying on like 3 Melta shots to maybe pop a Rhino. The Stalker, however, I am pretty big on. In the list I've been running recently, I've really missed not having a Stalker. No access to scouts, a Knight you can run out really early, scout him up the table, move another 12 inches, and just throw him in your opponent's face and go, here, deal with that while I move everything around the table, is, I think, really good. I know people haven't been playing as much Stalkers recently. They've kind of fallen in and out of favor towards the end of 10th edition, start of 11th and stuff like that. So a little 5-point drop is, I think, really good. What I will say about this data slate, though, is that it's really good for me in particular. With this 5-point drop, I've been able to swap the 1 Executioner I was running in my most recent list to a Stalker, because my list was 5 points below. I only needed 5 points to swap an Executioner for a Stalker. So again, this works out amazingly for me. I get exactly what I want, and I'm never punished. 3 of the detachments have been moved around on their dispositions. Lords of Dread has gone from priority assets to taken hold. I think this change is overall fine. I feel like Lords could play either relatively well. The sticky makes me think that it plays taken hold pretty well. However, the idea of running 4 or 5 big Knights makes me think priority might have done it a bit better. Any of you Lords players out there, let me know what you're thinking. But I think this is a relative side grade, change of playstyle maybe. We've also got Bastions of Tyranny. This is our Tyrant detachment that I don't think anybody was really playing. It was originally on Disruption. It's been moved to priority assets. Again, I think this is pretty good. If you're running a Tyrant or 2, maybe this is pretty good. You move the Tyrants up, stand them in the middle, they'll do objectives and still shoot. It might be alright. I don't know if I'd recommend a Tyrant, but again, side grade at worst. Lastly, the big one I think a lot of people are going to notice is Infernal Lance is no longer Purge the Foe. It is now priority assets. There's been a lot of talk I've been seeing around this one. Some people considering it a horrific nerf. Some people are considering it an incredible buff. I think, in all honesty, it is probably a small buff. When you really start looking into the priority assets missions, how they've been performing recently, their win rates, if they're topping GTs or not, priority seems like a really good disposition. You can score really highly on the primary. It kind of slots perfectly in with our army, our ability to action and still shoot. So putting it on Infernal Lance, I think actually works pretty well. I have a Teams event around the start of August that I'm trying to kind of build up a list for. I'm on priority assets with Chaos Knights. So again, this benefits me perfectly. I now get to play Infernal Lance at the Teams event rather than like Lords of Dread before, which I wasn't really super high on. But Infernal Lance, like, you have my attention now. I think there's definitely still a build here where you can run a Despoiler or 2 Despoilers. As long as you screen them out, you can get them up to the middle of the table. You can action, you can still output just a blistering amount of firepower. I think on the whole, it's probably pretty good. Again, at worst, it's a side grade, but might honestly be a buff. The changes that I personally am actually excited for all came from the actual faction pack update itself. Again, I really wasn't expecting any of these. Usually, I find they really don't like to touch Knight datasheets or Knight rules or stratagems or stuff like that. However, I'm glad they've actually went in and done quite a lot of really meaningful changes here. There's one that just doesn't work whatsoever, but we'll cover that at the end. So number 1, first change, again, benefits me directly. In the list I was previously talking about, where I can get a Stalker instead of Executioner, I'm running double Abominants, and Abominants have received a direct buff here. All they've added is that their big gun, the Volkite Combustor, is now ignores cover. You're always going to be, at worst, hitting on 3s if you're shooting something, which is perfect. Oh, my fucking recording stopped. My recording stopped. all the ignores cover really does is kind of allow you to just plink 1 or 2 more shots on the hit roll through. You're basically always going to be hitting on 3s now, potentially on 2s if you're within towering range with the new 11th edition rules, which all that means is that you're fishing for more 6s when you go to roll the wound roll. Again, people don't like that aspect of the Abominant, but I think it's great. You know, you're giving me the opportunity to potentially do more 3 damage devs, like, perfect. That's what I want. The next one was to the Knight Desecrator. Essentially what they've done is they've moved its old rule, which was devastating wounds against monsters and vehicles, onto its main gun instead. It just has dev wounds, monster vehicles, which I think is really quite nice. What they've replaced its old datasheet rule with is essentially ignores all modifiers to the ballistic skill, the hit roll, and the wound roll. This is really good. I think the Knight Desecrator often has a consistency problem with only 3 shots in shooting. So being able to now hit on 2s, basically always, and then wounding on 3s, usually, means you're going to be handing your opponent a lot more saves, a lot more chances to do the d6 plus 3 damage or whatever. Like I mentioned, only 3 shots is still a bit questionable. I don't love the Desecrator, but with these changes, I think there's a real world where you actually seriously consider playing him now. I don't know if I would ever consider more than 1 Desecrator. Maybe there's another madman out there who's willing to try that, but I think in Hellhunt Lance, honestly, this guy maybe actually exists, you know? He's a real thing that can sit at the back of your field, can plink off some damage on either light vehicles or heavy vehicles here or there, take them down over 2 or 3 turns. Later in the game, he can come out, he can actually hit pretty decently with his melee. And obviously in Hellhunt Lance, he benefits from his own aura, so hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, consistency's getting up there now. You're more likely to hand your opponent, instead of 0 saves, a lot more likely to hand them 1, quite often 2 in all honesty, which is a lot better than he usually is. The next change, and I think this is quite a big one, is to the Knight Ruinator, which, like, finally, like, since this guy released, nobody is playing the Ruinator. They dropped his points down to 340 in the last data slate, and still nobody was even kind of taking a sideways glance at him, so I'm really, really happy to see that they're actually putting some love into this guy. What they've essentially done is, for its 2 weapons, they were previously both 2d6 on the shot count. Now they are both d6 plus 6. This is, like, really, really big, actually. Instead of, your minimum roll before being potentially just 2 shots on one of your weapons, your minimum shots are now 7. Incredible. The consistency upgrade is, like, exactly what he needed. For a Knight chassis that struggled with consistency in melee, the melee obviously only 4 attacks, not great. And then you looked at its shot count, and it was like, well, if I low roll here, I'm really just not doing anything. Now, having a set shot count in combination with its reroll wounds from its ability for getting that, it's actually quite consistent now. I found in my own games that Chaos Knights kind of tend to have a bit of a problem with just, like, killing 5 or 10 Marines. Obviously, the old Double Gatling Despoiler was, like, incredible at it. It would pick up 5 Marines just by, like, looking at them. However, now that the Double Gatling Despoiler is dead, it's a little bit harder without committing quite a lot into them. However, I think the Ruinator fills this role, like, perfectly. Being able to throw, like, minimum 14 shots at 812/822 at a bunch of Marine bodies, which, again, there's still quite a lot of Marines in the meta, is really nice, actually. Getting the wound rerolls as well on top of that, if it is your quarry target, I mean, like, amazing. And at 340 points as well, again, they didn't raise this guy's points despite upgrading him quite drastically. This guy is really, really nice. He maybe still exists a little bit inside of, much like the Desecrator, Hellhunt Lance Purgatory. He gets a lot better when he receives his own aura. His buff is really nice to give to other War Dogs, especially if you're combining that with, say, the Desecrator reroll once to hit aura. So Hellhunt Lance feels like perfect for him. But I think testing needs to be done. There's maybe a world where he exists outside of that, but I really can't say for certain. I do think there's a really cool build where you could have, say, 3 Brigands and 3 Executioners with Ignores cover. All inside of Hellhunt Lance, you give the extra -1 AP from the Ruinator, the extra reroll once to hit from the Knight Desecrator. Suddenly you're doing a lot of shooting. Again, it's all kind of theory crafting at the moment, but yeah, Desecrator back on the table, which I'm very happy about. The last thing we have to go over is just a pretty, admittedly, sizable oversight from Games Workshop. They have changed one of the stratagems inside of Traitorous Lance, which initially when you read through it, I think is a really good change. However, it kind of literally doesn't work. It is broken, not in the way that it's really strong, in the way that it doesn't work. The change is essentially in Traitorous Lance, your stratagem Storm of Darkness used to say you gave your unit stealth and benefit of cover when they are the target of an enemy unit's attacks. In 11th edition, you never really used it ever. Cover is so easy to get with Knights, and giving benefit of cover and then stealth, which is also benefit of cover, kind of was just a bit of a non-combo. It was like nothing. You weren't really using it, which is nice. It was a stratagem you didn't really have to spend CP on, but didn't really feel that good just have a complete dud of a stratagem. Now, however, they've updated it to read, when your unit is a target of a ranged attack, your unit has stealth, and your unit is -1 to hit in melee. Initially, you read this and you say, this is really good. You move your knight up, say you're not on a terrain piece or anything, your opponent doesn't give you the benefit of cover, you can give yourself cover, and then when they come in to charge you, because you've moved your knight up, you're -1 to hit in melee. That's really good, and this was my impression when I first read it. However, when you reread it, you realize the wording makes it literally not work. This stratagem says you use it when you are targeted by a ranged attack in your opponent's shooting phase. So, you obviously get the stealth benefit, however, it means you get the -1 to hit in melee in the shooting phase. The way it works in 11th is essentially if a stratagem doesn't say it lasts until X, end of phase, end of battle round, end of turn, stuff like that, it just lasts until the end of the phase. And so this stratagem has no cap anywhere. It doesn't say these buffs last until the end of the fight phase. There's nothing. So the stratagem assumes that it just finishes at the end of the shooting phase, which means you only get the -1 to hit in melee in the shooting phase, which means it's completely useless. It doesn't work. There's no line in here that says you can also use this stratagem in the fight phase, which there probably should be, because you can't use this. You don't get the -1 to hit ever. Obviously, this is just an oversight from Games Workshop. Like, the way this is clearly meant to work is that if you're the target of an attack, you can do this until the end of your turn, you're also -1 to hit in melee. So it kind of, say a Defiler's running at you, they shoot you with the last cannons, makes you harder to hit in shooting, and then you're also -1 to hit in melee, you're a bit more survivable, yada yada, stuff like that. That's how it's meant to work. Obviously, they have not written it like that, but it's a complete oversight. This is just the kind of thing that when you get to the table, if you're at an event, if you're playing with friends or at a club or something like that, just check with them, check with a TO or your club organizer or just your opponent, have them read the stratagem, see how they think it should work. When I read it, I would usually just say, if your opponent chooses you the target of a shooting attack until the end of your turn, you get those buffs. Like, boom, perfect. My only hope is that GW just goes in with just a little tweak, a little change, just add a line of text in, changing the stratagem like soon. I really don't have to wait all the way until the end of the next month to get the next data slate, and then they'll finally change this and make a stratagem that will work. Obviously, this is one of those things that common sense says this should work a certain way. However, when you get to events and stuff like that, and you need specific rulings, and you happen to be playing an opponent that knows about this, rules as written, unfortunately, you never get the -1 to hit in melee. But yeah, hopefully we see a change with this soon. But overall, very happy with Chaos Knights. I think they went in perfectly. It's like I said, they went in with a scalpel, they changed what needed to be changed, and they didn't go overboard. They didn't hit us with a baseball bat. We haven't been hit out of the park. This isn't a home run, but I think this is just exactly what we needed. I think some people were hoping for points changes. I've seen is some of the kind of gripes online and stuff like that, which I don't really feel like we needed. Obviously, Ruinator is down quite a lot, Despoiler is still up quite high and stuff like that, but I think these rules changes might be enough to kind of take us out of the low win rate where we currently exist. I know obviously you see a 33% win rate, a 36% win rate or something like that, and it's like, oh my god, we're in the trenches, we need big changes, but I honestly think this might be enough. We're currently in that phase of 11th edition to where Chaos Knights isn't really solved. The main build, the triple Gatling Despoiler, is obviously dead. And we're now in that phase where we kind of have to rebuild, try new things, try things we weren't trying before, hint, hint, like Knight Ruinator, and trying to figure out the new kind of what works, what doesn't, what detachments, what war dogs, what everything, So I think going in with these small datasheet buffs and stuff like that is perfect, If they came in and immediately were like, boom, okay, 40 more points off the Abominant, 40 more points off the Desecrator, 10 points off the Despoiler. It's kind of just becomes, you forget about all of these changes and you just go, what are the cheapest bodies I can throw at my opponent? And we're kind of back to, we're back to Night Summer of 2025. So yeah, it remains to be seen, if this is going to be enough to kind of lift us back up. Come next data slate, I might be eating my own words, but I'm really excited about all of this. Again, I know I am biased. This all affects me perfectly. This is exactly what I want. Infernal Lance going to priority, the Abominate's getting buffs, the Stalker losing points. Like this data slate was for me. I genuinely think this is a pretty big thing for us. I think it's something to be excited about. It really encourages me to just start testing new things. You know, like I said, the Desecrator and the Ruinair, I was not looking sideways at before, but now genuinely considering them, and I really hope you are as well. I think there is probably going to be a swing backwards now of, oh, well, you know, dogs are cheaper. I think I saw somebody earlier say you can now fit 15 dogs in a list in a way, which, like, absurd. Maybe the pendulum swings back. We're back to war dogs. It's either despoilers or war dogs, and we go back and forth forever, which I hope isn't the case. You know, if that ends up being it, then I will eat my hat. But I think with some real experimentation, there could be a lot of really fun things come out of this data slate for us. Okay, camera died for a second time, so it's time I start wrapping up, unfortunately. The universe is telling me this video has gone on for way too long. But yep, I hope you're as happy as I am with the data slate changes for Chaos Knights. You know, if you play any other faction, I hope they weren't hit too hard. I hope there seems like a lot of really interesting things going on in the game right now, so I hope you are as excited as I am. Generally, I am really excited to play 11th edition at the moment. I've got a Teams event, my first Teams event coming up at the beginning of August that I'm really hyped for. Again, I'm taking Chaos Knights for that. I'm really looking forward to that. I've just been to my first ever Super Major this past weekend, which was some of the most fun I've had in 40k. There'll hopefully be a small little video coming out about that soon. You know, again, took Chaos Knights. I was the highest placing Chaos Knights player, which I was really happy with. It was a little bit depressing to see. I was the only one with a positive win rate by the end, which, you know, was a little sad to see, but I mean, you know, data slate buffs, you know, that's why these things are here. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed overall. You know, like, subscribe, ring the bell, leave a comment, everything like that. But yeah, that's probably all for now. So I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.